Have you ever wondered what your purpose in life is? Well, so did the wise King Solomon, and he wrote a book about it called the Book of Ecclesiastes. And today we're going to be looking at a little bit of that book here on this week's lesson. Hello, welcome to this week's lesson. I'm Brian Vermeer. For the next 6 weeks, we're going to be looking at our purpose. What is our purpose in life, and what do we know about our purpose in life? But before I begin today, I'd like to remind you, if you enjoy these lessons, please support me by hitting the like button on the video, subscribing to the Mr. Vermeer's Class YouTube channel, following the Mr. Vermeer's Class Facebook page, and if at all possible, please support me on my Patreon. I'm up to 93 subscribers, and I'm kind of holding there. I just need 7 more to reach 100 on YouTube. And I think that would be a very important number to help these videos get spread so that more people can see them. Well, today we're going to start a series on our purpose in life. And today we're going to talk about questioning our purpose. You know, every one of us questions our purpose in life sometime. Why are we here? What are we here for? If you believe in God, you may ask, well, what has God put me here to do? Am I doing what God has put me here to do? When you're a child, you think about, what am I going to be when I grow up? And then when you do become an adult, do you become what you intended or what you thought you would be? My life has turned out quite a bit different from actually the way I imagined it. But I still feel that I am doing what God has called me to do. So, even the great King Solomon wondered about his purpose, and he wrote a book called the Book of Ecclesiastes. And I have always wondered about that title, Ecclesiastes. Where does that come from? Because I've always known that, ecclesia, not always known, but ecclesia, the Greek word ecclesia, is the word that the New Testament translates as church. So what does that have to do with Ecclesiastes? Well, it turns out, first of all, the Hebrew name of the book is Koheleth, which simply means teacher. In Hebrew, the custom is to name the books after the first word or the first phrase in the book. For example, in Hebrew, the book of Genesis is called Bereshit, which means in the beginning, since those are the first words of the book. Well, in Ecclesiastes, the first word is the word teacher. And so that's what they call the book. But when the Septuagint was written, that is when the Hebrew Old Testament was first translated into Greek, the books were given names, and they were given Greek names in a lot of cases. And this book was given the name Ecclesiastes, which actually means the teacher or the speaker of an assembly. And ecclesia, again, the word translated church in the New Testament, actually means an assembly of people. So Ecclesiastes would be the teacher or the speaker for that assembly. So in other words, Ecclesiastes actually means the preacher. And that is kind of a good name for this book, since these are the words of a great teacher or a great preacher. Let's take a look at Ecclesiastes chapter 1. Let's just start at the very beginning. And I'm going to start by reading verses 1 through 7. It says, "The words of the teacher, son of David, king in Jerusalem. Absolute futility, says the teacher. Absolute futility. Everything is futile. What does a person gain for all his efforts that he labors at under the sun? A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun sets, panting. It hurries back to the place where it rises. Gusting to the south, turning to the north, turning goes the wind, and the wind returns in its cycles. All the streams flow to the sea, yet the sea is never full. To the place where the streams flow, there they flow again." So you can probably tell right off that this is going to be a downer. This is going to be a very depressing book, at least the way it starts off. It starts off in verse 1 with the words of the teacher. Now, who is the teacher? There's, scholars debate who actually wrote the book of Ecclesiastes. Verse 1, it says, the words of the teacher, son of David, king in Jerusalem. Well, the son of David who became king in Jerusalem was, of course, King Solomon, who was well known for his great wisdom. So he is the obvious answer as to who wrote Ecclesiastes. It could have been another king. It could have been someone else who served afterwards. Son, can sometimes mean descendant. So it could have been any of the descendants of David who served as king. I personally think it is Solomon, although I have heard other people try to argue that it could have been, different people as well. It doesn't matter. The book is the Word of God. It is considered Scripture. So we do need to study it. We do need to see what it says. But then he starts off. Absolute futility. Absolute futility. Everything is futile. Or if in the King James, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What he's simply saying here is, nothing means anything. He's looking at life. Now, something we need to realize. Solomon, or the writer here, is looking at life from the point of view of an agnostic. That is, someone who doesn't really care whether there's a God, someone who says, we don't know whether there's a God or not. I live here in the Deep South, and there are a lot of people around here. Most of the people around here, if you were to ask them, they would tell you that they are Christian. But by the way they live, most of them I would actually classify as agnostic. That is, they'll tell you they believe in God, but they don't really live as if they believe that God is real, that God is sovereign, that God will one day judge them for their works, or anything like that. Most people really just don't kind of care. And this is the attitude. This is what the teacher here is seeing as he looks at the world. Everything is futile. And again, he's looking at it from the point of view of one of these people who doesn't really know about God, who doesn't really care about God. He may have heard about God. He may even tell you he believes in God. But in his heart, he doesn't really believe. He doesn't really care whether or not there's a God. All he sees is the world. And in the world, he sees that everything seems to come to nothing. Verse 3, what does a person gain for all his efforts that he labors at under the sun? It does not matter what you achieve in your life. You're going to die. And if you believe there is no God, if you believe there is no supernatural, then when you die, your life is over. And everything that you've done, as far as you're concerned, has amounted to nothing. You can't take it with you. Whatever I achieve in my life, when I die, if there is no God, if there is no supernatural, then my life is over, and it doesn't matter to me anymore, what I've done or anything that I've done or what it matters. Which is why I've always wondered, why it is that, the atheists are the ones who seem to be working the hardest at trying to improve the world, at least, in their point of view. They believe they're improving the world. If I'm an atheist, why should I improve the world? It's not going to do anything for me. I'm just going to die. And when I die, I'm not going to care what happens to the world. So this is the point of view here that Solomon is taking. It doesn't do any good to do anything because whatever you do, you're going to die. He says a generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. In other words, I'm here, I had parents, my parents gave birth to me, and then my parents will die. My dad, has already died. My mother is, in her 80s now. I'm going to grow up. I've grown up. I've become an adult now. I've had a daughter. Someday I'm going to die. She's going to grow up. I hope that someday she will have children. And then she's going to die. A generation comes, a generation goes. It doesn't matter what we do. The earth is still going to be here. And again, if you take this from the point of view of an agnostic, as far as you're concerned, the earth is going to be here for the next 5 billion years or so until the sun burns out. And then when that happens, big deal, everything we've accomplished is gone. So why try to do anything? He says in verse 5, the sun rises, the sun sets, panting, it hurries to the place where it rises. The sun goes up, the sun goes down. One day comes after another. As I've gotten older, I've seemed to notice that days seem to go by faster. Not the actual day itself, but the weeks and the months and the years. It seems to me, when I was a child, it seemed that my childhood lasted forever. And, I look at the time, from when I was born till when I was 18, that 18 years, just seemed to be, a long period of time. And I seemed to have accomplished, so much, within that period of time. And now I look back at the past 18 years of my life, and it doesn't really seem like I've done that much as far as advancing, myself or anything. I'm still doing the same thing now that I was doing 18, 20 years ago. And it just doesn't seem like it's been that long. And, I've talked about my daughter. My daughter has just left for college. It doesn't seem like it was that long ago that she was a baby and I was holding her. And to her, though, it's her whole lifetime. It seems like a long time to her. But to me, it just doesn't seem that long. And the older I get, the faster time seems to go. He says in verse 6, gusting to the south, turning to the north, the wind changes. He's noticing the patterns of the wind during the seasons. During one season, you have a north wind blowing, and then the season change, and it comes from the south, and it has this cycle. It just goes back and forth, like the sun going up and down and up and down. Things just repeat themselves over and over and over. One day is like the next. Nothing seems to be changing. In verse 7, he talks about water. The streams flow to the sea, but the sea is never full. And then the water returns. It says to the place where the streams flow, there they flow again. It's kind of like, he knows about the water cycle, which he probably did. No, I don't think people back then were stupid. I think they knew that, the water flows from the stream into the sea, into the ocean, and then it evaporates, and then it comes back down as rain and refills the stream again, and the stream flows back into the sea. The water just goes around and around and around. Even in my own house, I used to tell I'd tell my science class, I'd talk about how the water I drink today is the water that somebody else flushed yesterday. It just went to the water treatment plant and then got put back into the water tower. And the kids would look at that and just go, ooh, and I'd always have that one kid who says, boy, I'm glad I'm on a well then instead of the sewer system. And I'd say, well, if you're on a well, if you have a well in the septic tank, then it's, the water you drink today is the water that you flushed yesterday. It just soaked down into the soil, purified, got back into the water table, and then comes back up into your well again. So it's, again, things just repeat themselves. Things just go over and over and over. And this is something he's going to talk about here in the next section. Let's look at verses 8 to 11. He says, all things are wearisome, more than anyone can say. The eye is not satisfied by seeing, or the ear filled with hearing. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done. There's nothing new under the sun. Can one say about anything, look, this is new? It has already existed in the ages before us. There is no remembrance of those who came before and of those who will come after. There will also be no remembrance by those who follow them. All things are wearisome, more than anyone can say. The eye is not satisfied by seeing, or the ear filled with hearing. I have a fairly large record collection, probably close to 1,000, record albums. People will look at that and say, there's no way you can listen to all of them, and that's probably true. And I'll probably never be satisfied. I'm always going to want more, even though I can't listen to the ones that I've already got. People who collect books, and you can tell I'm also, a book collector. I haven't read all of the books that I got, but yet I still continue to buy more. People are never satisfied with enough. There's no such thing as enough. People always want more, even though they can't do everything with what they've already got. The eye is not satisfied by seeing. The ear is not satisfied with hearing. We still want to see more. We still want to hear more. We can't be happy with our possessions. And later on in the book, Solomon goes on and he says, I tried pleasure. I tried living just to please myself. And that ends up not being the purpose of life. That did not make me happy because I was never satisfied. I always wanted more. So the purpose of life, he's saying here, is not entertainment, not to please yourself, because that doesn't satisfy you. In verse 9, he says, what has been is what will be. And what has been done is what will be done. There's nothing new under the sun. History repeats itself. The old phrase, those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. I think we're seeing a lot of that. There seems to be a movement underway to forget certain parts of history. Anything that we don't like that happened in history, we kind of gloss over. I think the world's becoming more, Orwellian, in that, if you've read the book 1984 by George Orwell, the job that the main character has, he works for the government and he works in what's called the Ministry of Truth. And his job is to go back and find old newspapers, old magazines, anything that has already been printed. And if there's anything in them that does not agree with what the party says today, his job is to either destroy it or change it so that it does agree with what the party says today. In other words, we don't want anything in the past that might be offensive to be learned about today. We don't want people to think that the government has ever thought differently in the past. And I see that happening in the world today. And I think we're going to end up repeating the same mistakes because there's a movement today to forget the past, or to at least or change the past, gloss over the past. He says, can anyone say about anything, look, this is new? It's already existed in the ages before us. We look at inventions. We look at things that people have invented. And it turns out inventions are not doing anything new. I have a washing machine to wash my clothes. And some people, when that came out, people thought that is a great invention. But you know what it does? It washes clothes. People have been washing clothes since the beginning of time. Adam and Eve had to wash their clothes. All the machine did was make it easier to do so. It did not do anything new. You look at your television. All your television is a source of entertainment and a source of communication. Well, we've had entertainment and communication from the beginning of time. Television is just a more convenient way to deliver it. There's nothing new. We just find new ways to do the same things that we've always been doing. I used to tell my classes, here's what you need to do if you want to get rich. You look at something that people do every day that people hate doing, and you find some way to make it easier, and then you sell that way to them. Even computers today are not doing anything new. They're just doing our thinking for us. And that's another thing I'm kind of worried about as far as the future goes. We're talking about today about artificial intelligence. Personally, I don't believe in artificial intelligence. I don't believe a computer can become intelligent. I think the computer can only think the way that it's programmed to think. And if the computer seems to evolve in the way that it thinks, that's because its programmer told it how to evolve in the way that it thinks. Computers can only do what you tell them to do, but they just do it a lot faster. I can do math. My pocket calculator can do math. It can do it faster than I can, but it's still just doing math. It's not anything new. Nothing is new. We just find new ways to do the things that we have always done. And then in verse 11, there is no remembrance of those who came before and of those who will come after. Now you may look back and say, well, that's not true. We remember, the great historical figures. How many billions of people have existed since the world began? And how many people do your history books actually mention? We remember very, very few people. Do you know what your great-great-great-grandfather did? Do you know what your grandfather did? When you die, will people remember you 100 years from now? Other than maybe just a name on a tombstone or written in a family album somewhere. How many photographs do we have of people and events, but we don't remember the people in the photographs or what it was that they were doing that we took a picture of? We don't remember, okay, now here's a picture of my Uncle Phil or whatever. When did I take that picture? What were we doing at that time? I don't remember. People are going to be forgotten. One day I'll be forgotten. I'd like to think that, people will remember me. But most likely they won't. 100 years from now, I may still have my name written in some places, but no one's going to know who I am or what I did. Everything is futile. Everything is pointless, says King Solomon here. Let's finish up this chapter by looking at verses 12 to 14. He says, I, the teacher, have been king over Israel and Jerusalem. I applied my mind to examine and explore through wisdom all that is done under heaven. God has given people this miserable task to keep them occupied. I have seen all the things that are done under the sun and have found everything to be futile, a pursuit of the wind. So here, identifying himself, he says, I, the teacher, he calls himself the teacher. I have been king over Israel and Jerusalem. I was in charge of this entire country. And I decided to use my wisdom to look at everything going on, happening in the world. Let's remember, where Solomon got his wisdom. If this is actually Solomon. Solomon, when he became king, it says he had a dream and God appeared to him in this dream and asked him, he said, Solomon, ask me for anything and I will give it to you. In other words, what would you ask for if God appeared to you and said, I will give you anything you want. You name one thing and I'll give it to you, whatever it is. Solomon said, I've just become king of this nation. Give me wisdom and knowledge so I can lead these people well. And God said, since you've asked for that and not for great riches, I'm going to give you both. I'm going to give you the wisdom and knowledge that you need to lead the people, and I'm going to give you great riches. Israel grew to its greatest prosperity under King Solomon. But Solomon then says here, he says, I took that wisdom and I studied the world. I want to know what the meaning of life is. Have you ever questioned your purpose in life? Why are you here? Are you here to serve others? Or are you here to be served? Are you here to help people? Or are you here just to help yourself? You may say one thing, but do your actions match what you say? You tell people what you believe, but do you live as if you really believe it? Solomon writes this whole book. He says, I've seen all the things that are done under the sun, and I have found everything to be futile, a pursuit of the wind. Nothing that we do here in the long run matters. That's what Solomon says. Human achievement means nothing. And you can say, wow, that's very depressing. Well, go through and read the rest of the book. We're not going to be spending the next 6 weeks in this book. We're going to use other passages talking about our purpose in life. So go ahead and read the rest of Ecclesiastes. And you'll see all the things that Solomon tried to see, if that's what the purpose in life was. And warning here, I'm about to spoil the ending. He says the purpose of life is to fear God and keep his commands. That's what he ended up discovering after all of this. We are here because God put us here. I didn't ask to be born. How many times do kids say that to their parents? But I was born. And since I was born, that means God has a purpose for my life. If you're watching this, God has a purpose for your life. If you don't know what it is, then be like Solomon and ask God. Find out what it is. Ask God to show you what your purpose is. If there is no God, then there is no purpose. But since I believe there is a God, then I believe God has a purpose for me. And my purpose in life is to do God's will, to do what God tells me to do. And your purpose in life is to do what God tells you to do. So if you're questioning your purpose, the first thing I want you to know is that you have a purpose. And I can't tell you what your purpose is, other than what Solomon says, fear God and keep his commandments. And that means his commandment to you to do what he tells you to do. I hope you enjoy this series, and I'll see you again next week.